Welcome to this new automotive news video for Friday, June 5th, 2026. Today we're going to talk about Mercedes, whose cars could simply be banned from sale, about Audi bringing back one of its most iconic cars, and about a new study revealing fraud among French auto repair shops. I hope you'll find this video interesting. If you do, as always, I'm counting on you to show it by leaving a like, subscribing for future videos, boosting this one if the option appears for you, and leaving a comment where you simply share your opinion on today's news. Mercedes is in an absolutely incredible situation, one that was unimaginable just a few months ago, which could simply ban them from selling their new cars and, above all, force them to close their dealerships. The German brand is indirectly involved in a conflict that goes beyond cars, the economic war between the US and China. You may not see the link yet, but we'll explain. For several years, the United States has been trying to limit Chinese influence in sectors considered strategic. In the United States, a House of Representatives committee has just approved a bill called the Motor Vehicle Modernization Act. Behind this rather technical name lies an extremely radical measure. Its goal is simple: to prevent automakers linked to governments considered strategic adversaries from being able to sell, import, or produce vehicles on American soil. Currently, we're focusing on the United States. But this will also affect our European market. China is clearly among the countries seen as potential threats. Up until now, you might think this law only targets Chinese automakers, but if you take a closer look at the law, there's a little surprise. A little cherry on top is that the law actually plans to apply to all companies, where a significant part of the capital is held directly or indirectly by entities connected closely or remotely to China. And this is exactly where Mercedes has a big problem, because the largest individual shareholder of the German group is BAIC, formerly Beijing Automotive Industry Corporation. BAIC is not just a simple Chinese brand. It's an automotive brand that is itself owned by the Chinese government. And indeed, BAIC owns 10% of Mercedes' capital. The troubles don't stop there, because the second largest individual shareholder is Li Shufu, the founder and chairman of the Chinese group Geely, who also owns almost 10% of Mercedes' shares. Once combined, these two stakes represent about 20% of Mercedes' capital, and it's precisely this figure that is now drawing the attention of the authorities. American authorities, since in this famous law, there is a threshold not to be exceeded, which is 15%. Now, 20%, as you understand, is above 15%, which means that Mercedes simply falls within the scope of this upcoming law, which means that if Mercedes doesn't get an exemption, well, it will no longer have the right to produce cars in the United States, nor the right to sell them either. And that will definitely have consequences, of course, for Mercedes to begin with. Because you see, the United States is its second biggest market right after China, which is a market that European brands are currently losing. Anyway, so they're taking refuge in the North American market, since in Europe you can't really say that car sales are doing particularly well. If Mercedes loses the United States and China, selling just a few electric cars in Europe will be tough. Not to mention the indirect impact on Mercedes. Losing a major market means selling fewer cars, resulting in less revenue for developing future models, engines, electric vehicles, and new technologies. These are also indirect consequences for employment in Germany, because after all, there are still quite a few models sold in the United States that are made in Europe. For example, the E-Class, S-Class AMG models, and sometimes the C-Class, depending on the generation. So if the United States stops buying these cars, Europe won't need to produce as many. And that will also mean layoffs in Germany. And it will prevent most European brands, which are currently trying to form partnerships with Chinese brands, from doing so. For example, if BMW partners with a Chinese brand and seeks a technology transfer in exchange for giving up some company shares, they know this would effectively end their presence in the American market. So, of course, that would have major consequences for Mercedes, but it would also have consequences for employment in the United States, since Mercedes employs about 10,000 people over there, who would inevitably lose their jobs with the end of Mercedes. That doesn't even include indirect jobs at dealerships, not just Mercedes ones, but also those selling Mercedes vehicles. Mercedes defends itself as best it can, explaining that the two Chinese companies that own them do not work together and are not a block of shareholders. The fact remains that, as the law is currently written, Mercedes is in a kind of gray area, and just as Volvo did a few months ago for pretty much the same reasons, it's entirely possible that Mercedes could request and obtain an exemption. But if you think this story is worrying, wait until you see what this new study reveals about certain procedures carried out in French garages. If you've ever felt like you were paying too much for a repair, this new study is likely to interest you a lot, since the DGCCRF, the organization responsible for protecting French consumers, has just published the results of a large-scale investigation conducted in the automotive repair sector. And the figures are quite striking, since in 2024, 40 out of the 1,600 establishments that were inspected had shortcomings that were serious enough to justify corrective measures or sanctions. What does that actually mean? It means that investigators found numerous issues with price information, with rates sometimes missing, incomplete, or hard to read. Basically, you get your car repaired without really knowing how much it's going to cost you, and usually when it's time to pay, the amount is often higher than what you would have expected. In more serious cases, deceptive business practices were found, particularly when the final charge exceeded the original estimate. Investigators also found that some professionals did not properly inform their customers about the possibility of using reused parts. That doesn't mean you think you're buying a new part when the mechanic is actually installing a used one. It simply means that very often it's possible to repair your car with a used part, which is generally cheaper, and by default, the mechanic offers you new parts. Among the practices that also caught the attention of the DGCCRF, there's also particulate filter removal. Yet, it's quite convenient, but obviously illegal. Behind the little-known term particulate filter removal hides an operation that is actually completely illegal. Removing the particulate filter on recent diesel vehicles. This modification helps people avoid costly breakdowns, but it greatly increases polluting emissions. Without a particulate filter, soot isn't properly treated and is released into the atmosphere through the exhaust. Fraud control authorities are now focusing on a growing trend among drivers, converting vehicles to run on superethanol E85. While legal if done properly, investigators found some professionals fail to give customers all required information. In particular, because they are supposed to inform the customer that after installing an ethanol conversion kit, they need to update their vehicle registration and, most importantly, notify their car insurance company. Don't jump to conclusions. This investigation doesn't mean 40% of mechanics are scamming customers. The DGCCRF explained that this increase in detected violations could be due to better targeting of inspections, since they mainly inspected garages that had the most reports, for example, through the Signal Console platform. Most professionals complied voluntarily after inspection, but unfortunately, a few careless operators often damage the profession's reputation, whereas in the vast majority of garages, people work in compliance with the rules. The main lesson from this investigation is above all a reminder to stay vigilant. Ask for an estimate, check the posted information, and don't hesitate to ask questions before any repairs. Now we're leaving the world of garages to talk about an Audi model that an entire generation of drivers dreamed about and is making a big comeback. Indeed, against all odds, but without any real surprise. In the end, after Audi stopped making its gas-powered sports cars like the TT and the R8, and realized that, in the end, it was a big mistake. If only for the brand image, well, Audi is backtracking and announcing the return of the R8. It really didn't look good for Audi, which just entered Formula One, not to have any real sports cars in its lineup. That's why yesterday they announced the return of the Audi R8. Well, it's basically the same. It's called the Nuvolari, not R8, but it's clearly identical. A car based on the Lamborghini Temerario's platform and mechanics. So to put it simply, this Audi Nuvolari is a Lamborghini Temerario with Audi's own styling, which means that under the hood, we'll find the 4-liter turbo V8, which is mounted in a rear mid-engine position. Just like in the Temerario, an engine that can produce 800 horsepower with 3 electric motors added, 2 at the front and a third one integrated into the gearbox. Since it's a plug-in hybrid, it has a small NMC battery of 7.3 kilowatt hours. Quite surprisingly, it will be more powerful than the Temerario. The Temerario boasts 920 horsepower in hybrid and race mode. In this same driving mode, the new Airy claims 1,001 horsepower, probably a little nod to the legendary Bugatti Veyron, which had exactly this power in the early 2000s. Audi claims 0 to 100 in 2.6 seconds compared to 2.7 seconds for the Temerario, 0 to 200 in 6.8 seconds and a top speed of 350 km/h. While Lamborghini, with its Temerario, is officially rated at 343 kilometers per hour. Audi has also added its in-house expertise with an advanced torque vectoring system that uses the 2 front electric motors to independently manage each wheel. Additionally, it has an active wing that produces up to 400 kilonewtons of aerodynamic downforce. In short, on paper, this is simply the most powerful and highest performing Audi ever offered as a production model. Unlike the R8, this new Audi won't be a mass-produced model. It will be a limited edition with only 499 units. The first deliveries are expected to begin next year, and its price will probably be higher than that of the Temerario, meaning likely over 300,000 euros. For your information, its name comes from the Italian driver Tassio Nuvolari, who was associated with the achievements of Auto Union, the historical ancestor of Audi. It might not be as sexy as having a V10 car like the previous generation of the R8, but It shows that Audi definitely isn't giving up on combustion supercars and that the brand is coming back to reality. Customers with money who like this type of car just don't want electric ones. That's today's news. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, I'm counting on you to show it. As usual, by leaving a like, subscribing, and possibly supporting through the join button below this video. See you again tomorrow for the first news of the weekend. Take care. Thanks for watching this video. Bye.